addictive nature, now that you've crashed your life really down the toilet, what you got left in life? Apart from you consume and put your energy in the Watchtower. But hey, you know, each to their own, yeah?
Hi, Keith. I'm taking a course called Interpersonal Communication. Notice what it says here under the heading Monitor Labels. Suppose you get together with 5 others in a study group, and a student named Andrea monopolizes the whole meeting with her questions and concerns. Leaving the meeting, one person says, "Gee, Andrea is so selfish and immature. I'll never work with her again." Another person responds, "She's not really selfish. She's just insecure about her grades in this course, so she was hyper in the meeting." Chances are that these 2 people will perceive and treat Andrea differently depending on whether they've labeled her selfish or insecure. Once the 2 people have labeled Andrea's behavior based on their subjective and partial perceptions, they may act toward Andrea based on their labels. What this is saying, Keith, is that there's a very good possibility that the Watchtower Society has tricked its members into believing that all those that leave it have flushed their lives down the toilet, as you say. There's something that I have that many may not have, many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. I first read this book when I was 17 years old. When I became involved in the Watchtower Society, I forgot many of the principles that Norman Vincent Peale taught. Some of those principles had to do with, and I'm going to use different language than what he probably used, but had to do with like imprinting on the mind by suggestions, what people say. When you make the statement, or I'm sorry, Keith, when we make a statement to somebody implying they've flushed their lives down the toilet, if that person was brought up in an environment of negativity, that type of statement could really crush and hurt somebody, perhaps even causing them to go out and commit suicide. Is that something we would want to be responsible for? Do we want to say statements that crush people? Now, in my over 2 years on YouTube, I've certainly said quite a few things I regret. I've hurt some people. I've gotten some complaints. Sunday morning sleeper, I think of. Smoking in the graveyard. And I regret those things, Keith. But one of my biggest regrets was the time I spent in the Watchtower Society condemning others the same way that I witnessed in the beginning of this video. That same behavior that I once had. Where I once thought I had the truth, my knowledge expanded. And as my knowledge expanded, I realized that I merely thought that I had the truth. And I also realized I had to get out of the Watchtower Society. for it was retarding me socially. And it was retarding me in the area of knowledge. You see, I would get a morsel of new light, perhaps once a year. And somebody like me needs lots of information going into my head, lots of knowledge. You know, the kind of knowledge that you're taught is just a waste, like rooms and rooms of books. Well, I enjoy those rooms and rooms of books and taking in that knowledge. And in the Watchtower Society, Watchtower Inc., it just wasn't stimulating my desire to learn fast enough. So as my knowledge increased, the Watchtower Society diminished in importance. I learned that the Watchtower Society was using logical fallacies in argument, and I began to think that it was being done intentionally and not mere accident, not the work of imperfect men, but actual wicked men that wanted to hijack my mind and keep it in that condition. I then learned how the Watchtower Society was invested in a corporation called Randcam, an engine company that develops engines for U.S. Navy aircraft. And I had a problem with that, Keith. I had a little problem thinking that my donations were actually being used for something like that. I also learned that there was a defense fund set up for the Watchtower Society because of its policies and how they deal with the pedophilia issue within their organization and the extent that they go to cover it up. I had a problem with the idea that my donations were being used to protect this corporation from itself, from its own from its own policies and ways of treating pedophilia as a sin and not a crime. So you see, Keith, with that truth came greater knowledge. And with that greater knowledge came the courage to escape.